have a closer look at the teams. Joseph Ugarte running that Incineroar, Venusaur, Groudon, Charizard, Lunala, and Grimmsnarl, with Flavio opting for Shedinja, there it is again, with the Galarian Moltres, Incineroar, Zacian, Kyogre, and Porygon 2. So on Flavio's side, we've got that classic, you know, Kyogre and Zacian combination, and it's nice to see the Galarian Moltres that we just showcased very recently on the stream as well, taking another appearance. But on Joe's side, I'm interested to see what this Lunala is going to get up to.
Lunala has been a restricted Pokemon that has really risen to prominence in the Series 12 meta. I think it flew under the radar just a little bit earlier on because of how many Dark-type attackers were present to be able to deal that super effective damage. But Lunala does have access to Shadow Shield, which could come in handy here looking at the leads on the field.
Exactly, and I mean, when you are that Lunala, you do not want to face down against an opposing Moltres Galarian form, and that's exactly what we've got here. Joe's leading out with the Charizard and Lunala, but Charizard's unhappy because the rain has been set by Kyogre, and it looks like there's a potential for a lot of spread moves to come out here from Flavio, and that's where you need to be careful with Lunala. You don't want to get hit by a Dark-type move. It's going to deal 4 times effectiveness, but at the same time, you know, sometimes Lunala does have access to that White Guard.
That's true, and that could really help here against 2 Pokemon that have those spread-type attacks available. I mean, Kyogre, we've seen a lot of the variant that runs both the Water Spout and the Origin Pulse, and of course, you've got some great options on that Galarian Moltres as well, depending on what you decide to go for. But if Dynamax is on the table too, then that White Guard's not going to matter too much.
Well, Lunala's getting in on out of there and going to retreat in favor of the Groudon. I really like this play by Joe, not only overriding the weather to make sure the Water-type attacks from Kyogre are dealing less damage, but it really, really helps out its partner Charizard here. Going to be able to get that solar power boost and boost up the fire-type moves. And, you know, I can see Joe clicking that Dynamax button. Looks like it's going to be that Charizard, of course, as the Groudon's just switched in. And this is the perfect opportunity early on to get some big damage out on the table. Maybe go for something like a G-Max Wildfire and start getting that residual chip damage flowing on the field.
For sure, and when you know that Kyogre is really not threatening you too much anyway as well, that's a great risk that you can take here with the Charizard. But it looks like we're going to see a Dynamax on the other side too.
Yeah, dynamic Dynamaxes straight out of the blocks here in Swiss Round 6. Flavio is also going to go for the Dynamax, opting for the Galarian Moltres here. And I like this position in the sense that you could start going for something like those Max Airstreams, getting up the speed advantage on Flavio's side, so that even if, you know, you've got the Groudon on with the weather, you're still going to have a speed advantage. But we see the Charizard just going for that G-Max Wildfire fight, going into the Dynamax Moltres. It does so much damage, Rosemary.
It does, but it does also give a little bit of an advantage to Flavio because you can see that Berserk is going to be procced, and that will give that Galarian Moltres a +1 special attack. But it is the Max Airstream just to try to shore up that weakness it may have to having that speed disadvantage.
Yeah, and you can see as well, you know, the Groudon taking that really well, possibly indicative of an item choice, maybe an Assault Vest on there. You can see how well that Groudon is taking the attacks. Even in the sun, those Water-type moves deal so much to the Groudon. So I think a really wise item choice to allow that Groudon the longevity on the field. But the unfortunate thing for Joe is you switch this Groudon in, it's taken 2 attacks, it's at really low HP. You might lose your restricted very early on.
You could, that's for sure, but I think that one thing it does have going for it is that, you know, maybe it has some coverage options, maybe you're able to preserve it for later, especially when you know that the Kyogre on Flavio's side can still be pivoted out here, and it's quite healthy. So you may want to consider that, knowing that Water Spout is available.
Yeah, that's the thing. I wouldn't be surprised to see Flavio switch out that Kyogre here, just wanting to make sure that you can reset the weather and kind of pin down the opposing Pokemon, but no switches. It's going to be the Max Darkness coming out and finishing off the Groudon, and I love the synergy potential coming out from Flavio. You're going to get that special defense drop on the Charizard, leaving the Kyogre free to do some big damage.
And the best thing as well is that Max Airstream, you can really see how much work that just put in, because Galarian Moltres was able to move first to be able to secure that knockout, and in fact, Flavio is following that up with a second one, as Charizard is also going to be removed from the field.
Yeah, full credit to this Kyogre here. You know, it's in the sun, but it's having a whale of a time. It's being able to pick up these KOs left, right, and center. And I think the key thing here is that synergy between the 2 Pokemon. Galarian Moltres being able to get the drop, because in the sun, those Water-type moves are a little bit dwindled in their offensive pressure, but having that special defense drop allowed the Kyogre to pick up that KO. And now Joe is forced to bring in his last 2 remaining Pokemon, the Incineroar and the Lunala.
And you still have one more turn of Dynamax here for that Galarian Moltres. Knowing that Lunala is sometimes a little bit slower because it can operate under Trick Room conditions and set it, you're looking at Moltres too with that +1 Max Airstream, might be able to get some good damage in here.
And I do think that max airstream was really key from the Moltres because it just enabled Flavio to have the speed advantage and pick up those KOs. I mean, yes, Joe now has the position to go for something like a fake out into that opposing Kyogre, but the Moltres can still go for some good damage into that Lunala. Something like a Max Darkness is going to deal a significant chunk. Even though the Shadow Shield is intact, it's had a Berserk boost, it's still going to hit really hard.
Yeah, and you can see the Kyogre is just going to be preserved for later in the Incineroar, just being brought in its stead. And I like this as well because there's not much on the field at the moment unless, you know, maybe Joe calls this correctly, goes for something like a Moongeist Beam that would be able to pressure it out, but it is the Protect.
Yeah, the Protect is an interesting one because even if you go for the max move, it's going to chip that Shadow Shield through the Protect. But the Incineroar on Joe's side just going for the fake out into what was the Kyogre, and the Moltres going for the Max Darkness to no surprise into that Lunala through Protect Rosemary. That does over a third of damage, and that would have definitely got the KO, I think.
Yeah, well, it's a critical hit.
Oh, with a crit. Okay,
wow.
Okay, maybe not. But
yeah.
Still, Moltres just showing how offensively strong it can be.
For sure, and you know, that is such a good point as well, that, you know, despite the fact that Galarian Moltres had to use that Max Darkness into a Protect, that Shadow Shield is now no longer available. And so when you've got the Incineroar that had a nice free switch in, it still has access to potentially a Dark type attack that would be pressuring down the Lunala after it switched into the fake out. So fake out pressure for Joe off the board.
Yeah, that's the difficult situation, and Flavio has just piloted this perfectly. He's got 2 Dark-type Pokemon on the battlefield. This Moltres is just hanging on 2 HP, but when you're in Lunala, you don't want to face against any Dark types, and there are 2, so no surprise to see Joe lock in the forfeit there.
Yeah, it was a really tough one, I think, because, you know, that's I think one of the weaknesses with Lunala in this format is we have seen quite a few Pokemon, even Incineroar, just constantly including some type of Dark-type attack, whether it's Darkest Lariat, Throat Chop, or we've also seen Assurance. Look at these adjustments. Flavio Del Pidio is 1 win away from being able to secure a top cut place, and Joe definitely has the ability to bring this back.
Oh, that adrenaline right now must be intense. It's going to be the Moltres and Kyogre out on the battlefield for Flavio, with Venusaur and Grimmsnarl coming out from Joe, and I really love this adjustment. Not only have you got the Venusaur with the potential to switch in a Groudon from the back, reset that weather, get the Chlorophyll boost, you also have the Grimmsnarl, the perfect Pokemon to cause a bit of disruption, but you have to be careful with the fact that Grimmsnarl can't really do a lot to that opposing Moltres.
That's true. I mean, what you're really looking at here is sometimes maybe you have the damage mitigation with the screens, but also we saw some Spirit Break Grimmsnarl, so
yeah,
maybe you can drop
true.
the special attack, or, you know, it's just kind of, and get that super effective damage. It just kind of depends on how Joe decides to play out this first turn. Do we see a switch?
Yeah, we could very well see a switch, or potentially, you know, utilizing the Grimmsnarl to set up some defensive measures like a light screen, particularly in the face of 2 special attackers. But once again, a very dominant start from Flavio, clicking that Dynamax button here in turn 1, and is going to be setting up on the battlefield his Dynamax Pokemon of choice, which is once again going to be the Galarian Moltres. And I like this because not only was Max Airstream brilliant for the speed benefit, but Groudon hasn't switched in. If you get this Max Airstream onto the Venusaur, you could eliminate a real threat very soon.
For sure. I mean, it also depends on how we see the Venusaur get utilized here, but it's a light screen first, just to make sure that you're not taking too much damage, but also the Max Airstream going to see a reveal of the Coma Berry here from the Venusaur.
Absolutely love this item choice here. Of course, it's going to reduce the super effective flying type move here and allow Venusaur the option to move as long as it's able to survive anything Kyogre throws at it, if it is indeed faster, and possibly go for something like a Spore here. And if you can put that Moltres to sleep, it's going to really benefit you going forward. Kyogre's going to go for the Water Spout. It is at full HP in the rain. We know Venusaur can resist it, though. It's going to be able to survive in that light screen, paying off strongly for both of Joe's Pokemon. And Venusaur can go for the Sleep Powder. It does connect and finds its target on the Kyogre.
Yeah, the Kyogre going to get put to sleep here, but that also means that Galarian Moltres is still available to fire off a super effective attack into the Venusaur if it so chooses. But at least you've removed something that is very strong against potentially some of the Pokemon that Joe has brought in the back.
Yeah, this is a difficult situation here. I mean, the one thing I can think is possibly we have seen the Moltres run something like safety goggles, right? Because I was going to say, you know, if the Venusaur goes for the Sleep Powder into the Moltres, you can switch in the Groudon and then deal with the Kyogre having the speed boost. But possibly Joe, just knowing that that is a very popular item choice on the Moltres in the current meta, going down into that Kyogre. And I think switching in the Incineroar here, it's a Pokemon that can take a lot of these attacks from Galarian Moltres much better, but you have to still find a way to deal with the Kyogre.
Yeah, like taking a Max Darkness, that feels pretty good. So Incineroar really not going to be too bothered by that. And so while you do see a soften up here of these Pokemon by dropping their special defense, Kyogre does have to take its mandatory turn of sleep.
Yeah, I like the switch from Joe in the sense that it wastes one max turn. We see the Spirit Break that you mentioned earlier connect down onto that opposing Moltres, going to be lowering its special attack, and we see no weakness policy proc here as well. So very indicative to what the item could potentially be. But I think the one thing I like most about this situation is for Flavio, you're going through the max turns, but you are still getting damage on the board. And unfortunately for Joe, he needs to make sure there are Pokemon on the battlefield that can capitalize on the fact that Kyogre is asleep, because otherwise it's going to wake up. The max Airstream boost are going to make it incredibly speedy, and then thanks to the max Darkness special defense drops, Kyogre's going to be able to deal so much damage.
Yeah, I think that, Joe still has some really nice attackers in the back, and, the Venusaur was preserved. Still could go for a Gigantamax there, which would definitely pressure down that Kyogre. But we're going to see another rotation here. Joe revealing the 4th and final Pokemon for this game number 2, and it will be that Groudon.
Yeah, I like the switch, resetting the weather again, weakening the pressure that Kyogre can have if it wakes up. And Moltres just once again going for the max Airstream, keeping this nice and speedy pressure. It still does a significant chunk to that Groudon, however. Unfortunate damage for Joe. It's a critical hit.
Oh my goodness, the unfortunate turn of events here. That's been 2 critical hits so far in this match that Joe has taken. But Kyogre also wakes up turn 1, and that's just another really long string of unfortunate events here as, yeah, Groudon takes a significant amount.
Honestly, there is so much coming down from Flavio onto Joseph's Pokemon here. Thankfully, Joe has set up that light screen. It's helping the Pokemon, not get KO'd. And he has successfully been able to work around the max turns of this opposing, Moltres. Hasn't lost a Pokemon, but at what cost? There's not a lot of HP left on the field. And Flavio is once again in this phenomenal situation where he's got the speed advantage. And even if you're not dealing huge damage, you don't need to deal a lot in order to get the KO against Groudon and Grimmsnarl. You could easily go for another one of those water spouts with the Kyogre. I think that would finish the Pokemon off at this stage, and if you need that extra bit of chip, Moltres can always go for something like the Fiery Wrath.
For sure, and then especially when it's been so fast, you might be able to get a flinch too. There's just a lot of different options that are available from both of these Pokemon, and that speed control has been so important, but we're going to see the Moltres just leave the field.
Yeah, Moltres taking a little bit of a rest in the favor of this Incineroar. Nice to throw an Intimidate down against both of these Pokemon and give Flavio the utility to go for Fake Out in the next turn. I think it's interesting to kind of remove the speed advantage that Moltres had, but Joe's also going to make a switch, bringing Venusaur in, and to be honest, this is where Joe wants to be, having the Venusaur on the field in the sun next to that Groudon. I was going to say in order to Dynamax it, but I feel like Groudon's going to get there first.
Definitely seems to be that way, and so Joe did do a great job of getting through the Dynamax turns of the Galarian Moltres and does have the ability to utilize this Groudon, but it is still pretty low. I think you're hoping here that HP boost is enough to be able to get you through a move from this Kyogre. The Water Spout comes out. Groudon does survive, so it will be able to get an attack off despite it being a critical hit once again. Max Quake here.
Another critical hit. Max Quake is going to be able to connect down onto the opposing Kyogre and get the KO in retaliation for that critical hit. With another critical hit, Groudon kind of going, hey, I see what you're doing, Kyogre. I got one of these too. I'll just pull it out of my back pocket here. And I think it's amazing for that Groudon to be able to survive. A good call from Joe. I mean, we see that the Groudon didn't have a lot of HP, and Dynamaxing it at that point can be incredibly risky, but it needed that double HP stat in order to survive that Water Spout and be able to go for that Max Quake. My concern here is that Venusaur and Groudon are now in such a dangerous position for Flavio to be able to bring Pokemon into the battle. Zacian, for example, that is super healthy, is going to be able to deal with them.
And especially when, we've seen how quick Zacian can really move in this format. It tends to be faster than the Groudon in this specific situation. It's not faster than the Venusaur, at least with the Sunlight active, but you still have to sit there and wonder, is this Groudon going to be able to get another turn of Dynamax with what is available on the field? I
mean, the Incineroar has Fake Out pressure this turn, right? So it's able to just go into the Venusaur. We know Zacian is going to be outspeeding Groudon, can pick up the clean KO there. Yes, Venusaur's disruptive in Sun, but it's not even on the field right now. Grimmsnarl's rejoining.
Yeah, Grimmsnarl now might just have to be a defensive switch. We're actually just seeing a full swap out here. Going to remove that Dynamax from the field. Groudon now going to be replaced by the Incineroar. And I love this. Joe's Incineroar is very healthy, and the Intimidate drop is going to feel very good into both of these physical attackers on Flavio's side of the Incineroar and the Zacian.
Yeah, I really like this. Incineroar is going to go for the Fake Out into the Grimmsnarl, not be able to pick up the KO. And Zacian going for the Sacred Sword into the Incineroar, catching it on the switch and does a significant chunk of damage. But I do like that switch from Joe. The other two Pokemon were so vulnerable in the situation they were in, bringing the Intimidate in to just negate the opposing Zacian, you know, it looked like an excellent play, but getting that Sacred Sword onto the Incineroar, we're now in the same situation where both these Pokemon are at such limited HP.
Yeah, it is still a very tricky situation that Joe is going to have to navigate, but you at least have a Pokemon advantage, and you are starting to work through some of these field effects that are still available. I mean, the Sunlight, you've got 2 more turns. Maybe you're trying to find a way to pivot back in that Incineroar and that, excuse me, the Venusaur and the Groudon. But you do have a lack of offensive pressure on the board.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, Incineroar is going to be happy with the Sun, but I don't know if it's going to be able to move first. Interestingly, Flavio is going to be going for the switch here and is going to be bringing in the Moltres once again. Of course, Joe's Incineroar has the fake out pressure, so maybe just wanting to not let the Zacian take any unnecessary damage. Joe bringing in Venusaur as well. These Pokemon are just hopping in and out here at this point, and it's going to be the Reflect. Again, I like this play, you know, against the physical moves. It's going to give you that extra boost, but I'm not sure if it's going to be beneficial, to be honest, in the long run because of how little HP there is remaining. I'm not sure if the Reflect is necessarily going to be able to do enough.
Yeah, there's still a significant presence of physical attackers on Flavio's side, and you definitely still have to play to some of your outs here. But Zacian gets a chance to pivot back in from the parting shot from Flavio's Incineroar, and now does have the Intrepid Sword boost available. If you really want to try to mitigate that further, you are kind of forced into a situation where you have to bring in that Incineroar.
But I think that's the problem that Joe's kind of got here is if you're switching your Pokemon constantly, you're going to be taking unnecessary damage. And Flavio has been able to capitalize on that so well. I mean, if you switch in the Incineroar, sure, you get the Intimidate down, but I'm pretty sure that you can lose your Pokemon for that. There's, you know, unless the Venusaur's going to be able to put something asleep here, then it's really not going to be dealing too much of an offensive pressure, you know, and that's where Zacian can capitalize on it. Maybe see if Joe's going to switch in a Pokemon from the back and pick up a very clean KO with a Behemoth Blade.
For sure. I mean, Grimmsnarl is just going to make sure that, you know, Galarian Moltres is kept in check too, just a little bit. That light screen now going up, and the Sleep Powder, it will connect onto the Zacian. I feel like that is one of the biggest threats right now.
Yeah, I mean, I believe this was the final turn of Sun. So interesting not to see maybe a Protect coming out from that Zacian, but instead it's going to be taking a little bit of a nap as Fiery Wrath comes out from the Moltres, going to connect on the Venusaur, but not pick up a KO here.
No, it will not. Both of these Pokemon get to stick around for another chance. And I kind of wonder if Joe wanted that to happen, though. Grimmsnarl's done its job. Yeah. And so at this point, maybe you kind of are looking for a point to be able to bring back in the Groudon to reset the Sun. But we did see the Spirit Break on the Grimmsnarl, so that is still some type of pressure.
Yeah, the issue with the Spirit Break, I feel, though, is if you go for another one into that Moltres, you're going to put it in Berserk range. And that's the last thing that Joe needs at this point, is to kind of give your opponent a boost that can deal, you know, particularly with a spread move, it's going to be dealing big damage. The nice thing is you've got your 2 Dark-type Pokemon on the field, though, so Fiery Wrath isn't really going to be dealing too much, and Incineroar gets to come in and throw down another Intimidate. Moltres is still going to go for that Fiery Wrath connect on both Pokemon. Still not get a KO on Grimmsnarl, though.
Yeah, so that Spirit Break now, going to be able to fire off into that Galarian Moltres. It brings it very, very low, but it will drop its special attack, which will be just brought back up by the Berserk ability.
Exactly, you know, it's big damage, but not quite enough. And, you know, yes, the Incineroar now has that fake out pressure, but Zacian only has a limited amount of sleep turns. It's going to wake up very soon one way or the other, and then anything it really throws at either of these Pokemon are going to be able to get the KO. I mean, the one issue for Zacian is it can only really do single target attacks, right? It's kind of relying on the Moltres to go for those spread moves, but the key thing from Flavio, and I keep saying this, is the health of his Pokemon. Zacian's is still at full health. Joe's Pokemon, it really is just kind of a gust of wind's going to blow them over at this point. And although Joe has played really well defensively with his Grimmsnarl towards this endgame, I'm not sure that it has the offensive capabilities to deal with Pokemon like the Zacian right now.
Well, there's another chance here. Zacian does stay asleep, and this Fiery Wrath will finally finish off that Grimmsnarl, but it's still not enough to be able to secure the knockout onto the Incineroar. And so the parting shot now going to come through, and you can see how much Joe is prioritizing, trying to mitigate the damage output of this Zacian. The Reflect went up first. You saw the pivot in of the Incineroar to get that Intimidate drop, and now also the parting shot.
Yeah, you're completely right. I think that's a really good observation. The fact that the Zacian has been so pinned down by a lot of Joe's strategy here. You know, putting it to sleep, intimidating it, parting shot, and now Joe's actually in this position, and I have to credit his kind of navigation skills with the positioning of his Pokemon. You've got Venusaur next to Groudon, and the Sun is in the sky. Venusaur now can potentially get up to a few tricks.
It very much can, but I think you're still hoping that the Zacian stays asleep. Venusaur is still going to be the fastest thing on the field. but it has to make sure that it is able to hit these attacks. You know, it did have that -1 special attack drop from the parting shot from Flavio's Incineroar, but now it doesn't have that.
Yeah, and with Venusaur, you know, what do you do here? You have the potential to go for, you know, again, we know, depending on the move pool of Venusaur, we've seen it go for things like Earth Power, maybe using Weather Ball in the sun as well to hit that Zacian for, you know, a Fire-type move, but Incineroar's going to join instead for Joe. Groudon's hiding out in the back and throwing down another Intimidate against the opposing Zacian, so when it wakes up, it's certainly going to be a little bit sleepy. It kind of needs to shake off a few of those sleepy tears, as Venusaur is going to go for the Weather Ball, so targeting down into the Moltres, and I really like this because Moltres going for the spread moves has been so infuriating, and particularly as it can do some good damage to that Venusaur. Good to get the KO, but Zacian once again, Sacred Swording the Incineroar on the switch in.
Yeah, it will. But I think that Incineroar at this point has really done what it needs to do. Sure, we will see Flavio's Incineroar come in, and it will make the Groudon and Joe's side just a little bit less threatening, as it will drop its attack by 1 stage. But you're still looking at Venusaur having the ability to go for the Weather Ball. That's scary for the Zacian.
Yeah, it certainly is, and this is now, this is so awkward for Joe. And like you pointed out, Rosemary, the fake out here can go straight down into the Venusaur that we know will be the fastest thing on the field thanks to the sun in the sky and the chlorophyll ability, leaving the Zacian free to just go for damage into that Groudon. And, you know, having a look at the Groudon damage in Game 1, it looks like it's the Assault Vest variant. It's not going to be able to go for that Protect. It's just a sitting duck there for Zacian to pick off.
Yep, Venusaur with the fake out from the Incineroar will be brought down to 0 and knocked out. And to follow that up, Flavio will have a Behemoth Blade into Joe's Groudon to be able to get the final knockout and take this set 2-0.
I mean, huge congratulations to Flavio. That second match of the set was particularly long, and the way that, you know, Joe, although unfortunately he always seemed to be on the back foot, the way that he was able to take that game much further than Game 1 just by that pivoting and that positioning and still trying to keep the hope alive in that match, I think was expert play from Joe. But huge congratulations to Flavio. He's now in the next day of the competition.